morning. Welcome. My name is Josh Rogan. I'm a columnist with the Washington Post. This is my 10th Halifax International Security Forum. Thank you so much to Peter, to the Canadian government, and to all of you for bringing us back here together in person. This weekend has really been emotional. It's been great to see old friends and to make new friends. And it occurred to me last night that some of you don't know, you weren't here, this might be your first Halifax. You don't know what it was like in the before times. And being the veteran that I am, I thought I might give you a couple of tips on this Sunday. This is unauthorized. Peter's very nervous right now. Don't worry. So Sunday Halifax tips for, do not go to the airport without picking up one of these big maple glazed salmon souvenirs. Okay, they're amazing. Bring it to Thanksgiving, it's gonna be a hit, I promise. Tip number 2, if you must take a roadie, a glass of wine, put it in the paper coffee cup so that the staff can look the other way. Tip number 3, the people that you've met here, follow up with them. What happens in Halifax does not stay in Halifax. You will find that these connections become relationships and that many of them become lifelong friendships. It's true. For those of you who are new, you will unfortunately not be able to experience John McCain's stand-up routine that he would give at the lobster dinner every year. What was so funny about it, of course, was not that the jokes themselves, but the fact that he told the same jokes every single year. After my presidential election, I slept like a baby. Sleep for 2 hours, wake up and cry. Sleep for 2 hours, wake up and cry. I remember when I introduced John McCain to my wife for the first time, and she was my fiance at the time, he looked right at her and he said, "There's still time. You don't have to go through with it. Think it through." In my book, Chaos Under Heaven, available for purchase now wherever books are sold, I quoted John McCain, quoting Chairman Mao. And for those of you who know this quote, you could say it with me in your heads. He would always say, as Chairman Mao would say, "It's always darkest before it goes completely black." Now what was funny about that is, of course, Chairman Mao never said that. But McCain knew that, and that's why it was funny. John McCain would never quote Chairman Mao, but he loved misquoting him. What stays with me from all of my years traveling with John McCain was not the fact that he had the answer for every problem, but that he based his analysis and his worldview on certain principles. Those are the principles that underpin all of our participation in Halifax today. He knew that there was a thing called evil in this world, and he knew that the only thing stopping it was good people coming together. He knew that our system and our values were superior, that people actually do want to live with dignity and human rights and democracy and freedom. But that would only be possible if we lived up to our own values. And he knew that China was going to be the challenge of the 21st century. And of course, he was right about that. And while we don't have him here today, we do have the next best thing, a panel of people who live that tradition, who live those values. And I'm pleased to introduce them to you right now. Senator Joni Ernst from the great state of Iowa, distinguished member of the Senate Armed Services Committee.
Thanks so much.
James Apatharai, the NATO Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Emerging Security Challenges and a former journalist, is what I hope to be someday. And Rear Admiral retired Michael Manazar, the Vice President for Boeing Global Services Business Development, and a 36-year Navy veteran.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your service. I'm going to frame the topic very quickly and then hand it over to James. We've had a lot of discussion this weekend about, are we in a Cold War? Is it a Cold War? Are we heading towards a Cold War? Do we want a Cold War? Do we not want a Cold War? I think most of us understand that this is not the Cold War. There are many reasons, of course, but most importantly, it's because China is not the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, as McCain would say, It's a gas station masquerading as a country. Whereas China will soon have the biggest economy in the world. But also because this struggle, whatever we name it, will not be militarily foremost. It will be an ideological, economic, and technological competition. The Cold War had walls, literally. For the China challenge, we are now and will forever remain deeply intertwined and interdependent. We hear that China is ahead of the United States in technology. Is that true? We hear that we need to regain the competitive edge. Are we doing that? We hear that China is projecting its long arm of influence, not just to suppress its own citizens, but to intertwine us all in their social credit system. How do we combat that? What are the risks of selling China technologies? And what are the risks of China selling technologies to despots and dictators all over the world? We're in the process of a rethinking of our national security frame. What is a national security sensitive technology? What's a dual use technology? What could the CCP use against us if they wanted to? Artificial intelligence, blockchain, crypto, satellite technology, chips, facial recognition, DNA sequencing technology, brain-computer interface, gene editing, viruses. Yeah, we're going to go there, viruses. How does the US and like-minded nations operate in a global order that China is now upsetting with its technological advances? That's the question we're here to answer. James.
So just those little questions, and we have 45 minutes. Yeah, great. So what I'd like to do is, well, first start with one sentence on NATO policy, and that is, while we, as NATO, have a lot of concerns about China, China is not listed as one of the threats that NATO faces. That'll be the last sentence I say that is official NATO policy. I want to now move off of that because this is an on-the-record event. So the next thing I'd say is I think we all thought, around 2000, the technology was going to empower the individual and support individual freedoms. And I think there was a period where that happened, and in some areas it's still happening, but it's also reinforcing autocracy. That is very, very clear, and I want to list 3 areas in which that's happening just to kick off the discussion. One is within China, one is the export of technology to reinforce autocracy from China, and then third, how this is affecting the international system when it comes to autocracy. So first, within China, I just want to give a little overview of what's happening. I think most people know all the bits, but it's good to review it. First is, in essence, China is rolling out an all-seeing system of societal control, patrolled by algorithms that identify even potential dissent before it happens in real time. It has used major events to accelerate this rollout, the Olympics, COVID, now the Olympics. All these technologies are put in place, and they will say there are hundreds of millions of cameras in place. We all know this. They scan your face, the way you walk, your social media, your economic activity as they roll out the digital renminbi that will be accelerated, your travel, your friends, your reading habits, your purchases. And all of this is used towards a social credit score, which affects what you can buy, where you can travel. And it has a chilling effect on activity. You stop acting in certain ways because you don't know what's going to happen to you and who's looking at it. Xinjiang is the epicenter of this. It is the test bed for the most intense surveillance activity for political control. So this is the largest internment of an ethno-religious community since the Third Reich. I think we really need to put this in perspective. It is gigantic. And it is enforced by this whole tech ecosystem and AI startups in China, and I can name them here, including CloudWalk and iFlyTech, are willing commercial partners. CTech, a Chinese company, state-owned company that built much of this system, is now exporting it. It has 3 projects in 3 major cities, including Guangdong and Shenzhen. And the official policy is a national rollout. So it starts there, it's rolling out across China, and there's something called City Brain. That's what it's leading towards, which is cameras, doorbell cameras, the servers on autonomous vehicles, police cams, your phone, apps on every phone, smart speakers, your watches. All of this is integrated, and data used for political control and towards your social credit score. So that's within China. Second, all of this is being exported. And there are recipients of Chinese surveillance technology packages around the world, and I can start listing countries in Africa, start listing them in Latin America. For example, in Zimbabwe, a company called CloudWalk has set up the surveillance network. But what's interesting, and that's not just there, is the data isn't staying in Zimbabwe. By contract, the data goes back to China, and they're using this data to accelerate their understanding of facial recognition, gait recognition, voice recognition, not just for ethnic Chinese people, but for other people. So this is just data as a currency, which is obviously very valuable. And I think it's important to note that China has a policy called civil-military fusion. So everything that's dual use can be applied to military purposes. And they have a law that all the data that passes through Chinese companies can be accessed by the Chinese Communist Party, not just by the government. Mm-hmm. So no company has a choice. It has to happen. And it does happen. So that's the second part. What's the effect? I think this is really important. There is a demonstrable statistical effect on reinforcing autocracy. So according to Freedom House, since the year 2000, this is when tech has rolled out, the number of restrictions on political and military liberties has grown predominantly in authoritarian countries. Autocracies that use digital repression face a lower risk of protests than they did before 2000. The protests don't last as long as they used to before 2000. Doesn't diminish all the other political repression. It actually helps that because they can identify leaders. But this is also very interesting. Between 1946 and 2000, the year, as I said, the digital tools began to proliferate. A dictatorship lasted around 10 years. Since 2000, that has more than doubled to 25 years. And the ones that rely most heavily on technical repression last the longest. So these are statistics, and they really tell you what this means for us. And officials from autocracies go to China to participate in cyberspace management training sessions. So they're helping out. And of course, they're also exporting the Great Firewall, etc. So Chinese firms are at the leading edge of this, and Huawei is the leading supplier of surveillance tech in the world to 24 countries. Huawei employees have helped authorities in other countries actively spy on political opponents, like they're there doing the work. And so that brings me to the third bit, and then I'll stop. And that is, this is creating a community of countries that support a particular vision of the systems and standards on which our values depend. So we discussed at dinner yesterday, the International Telecommunications Union. Nobody had heard of this 5 years ago, but it's where the standards for the global internet are set. For example, 5G, and now 6G is being defined there. So it's run by, or it's led by a Chinese official. It is staffed heavily by Chinese officials, and that has an influence in the way that's designed. But that's taking place all over. The definition of internet freedom, of human rights, is being defined in these technical and UN bodies. And China has a very active campaign to change those definitions. That's very open and public, but also it has a growing community of countries that support that position. There is a team being built. So the question is, what do we do about it? I have answers about what we'll do about it, but I'll stop talking now.
Well, actually, that was probably the best explanation of the problem that I've ever heard. So I'm going to impose on you, not in your NATO capacity, not NATO official James, that guy's gone, personal capacity James. What do we do about it? Okay, all right. I prepared that too in my little book with the back fell off, so I felt like this is not official NATO anything. This is so here. I'll put on a few ideas, just one sentence each time. One is we have to recognize that there is strategic competition, and that is economic. It's related to our values, related to our security, related to the systems and standards. So get in the game, because there is a game on, and we're not playing. Second, don't make it worse. Meaning, we need to control the export from our countries and our companies of AI tech, facial recognition tech to autocracies. This we can do, especially when it's AI enabled. The majority of these companies are in OECD countries and in NATO countries. So this is within our remit. And that relates to biometric ID tech, facial recognition, voice recognition, gait recognition. So
Another point, restrict the sales of surveillance technology to authoritarian regimes. We should not be contributing to this, even if the companies don't make money. Then we need to work together as democracies in international bodies to defend the norms and standards on which our values depend, which means having a plan for the next year. Okay, in which body is a vote being taken on leadership, on standards? Organize, get the democracies together to sit together first and say, this is who we're going to support, this is the value we're going to support, and we vote together. So I'm just saying, as me, it's not a NATO position, but I think it's very important to defend our democratic values and human rights in the tech space. Then, surveillance tech. We also here have to set the right balance between surveillance and privacy and set a global standard, which democracies can then associate to. And that's a difficult discussion because, we catch bad people with that surveillance tech, so it's important. Then we have to offer an alternative to Chinese tech to companies that don't have a lot of money. Because what's happening? What's happening is we were just discussing this backstage. NATO countries together have an $870 billion a year trade deficit with China. We're buying things, we're sending them money, and they're using it to subsidize their companies, invest in their companies, buy our companies, and sell to developing countries at a very low rate at a price they can't resist. So we have a Nigerian colleague who was here, and he said, look, they came with good tech at a low price, and we don't have the money to buy something better. So unless we're in that game and offering a good alternative at a reasonable price, what are people supposed to do? So we have to do that. We have to protect and educate our companies, offer alternatives here too. So if you run a small startup or a publicly listed company in Canada or the US or across Europe, and your company is struggling and a Chinese company comes with money, it's not just that you have a choice, you have a fiduciary responsibility to take that money to protect your company. So we have to offer investment opportunities to them, even if it doesn't make a lot of sense. Financially, it makes sense politically, and I'm quite sure companies would bite if they could sell to us rather than to somewhere else. So those are just some ideas.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Senator Ernst, how far are we along on all of those things?
Josh, well, I was going to say, we're moving right along.
50%, 75%?
It is the federal government, so yes, it does take some time. But James brought up a lot of very important points that we are acting on. And in my capacity on the Armed Services Committee, I'm the ranking member on the Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee, which ties in perfectly with this forum today. So we look at areas, whether it's hypersonics, which we see that China is very involved in, artificial intelligence, which I'm going to dive into a little bit more, other avenues that we can use militarily, but also play into every civilian aspect across the United States. So in 2018, we passed the John S. McCain National Defense Authorization Act, and I had pushed for a measure within that act that established a commission. It was the National Security Commission on artificial intelligence. And that report was chaired by Robert Work and also Dr. Eric Schmidt. They brought together a bipartisan group of individuals that were very well versed in artificial intelligence and how we need to employ solutions across the United States, both in the military and the civilian sector. So they came up with, large in part, I'm just going to kind of gloss over the details, but some areas that really needed our attention as a federal government. And the first was leadership. And I think, James, you alluded to that in your remarks, where we do need key leaders, both in the federal government and in civilian sectors, working together in the areas of artificial intelligence to determine parameters. What should we be doing? What can we be doing? So that was really important. The second thing that, large in part, they identified was talent. We really have to develop talent in this area so that we can either remain in parity with China or, as we wish to do, outpace China in these areas. So talent will be extremely important in bringing that together. Hardware was another area, which is one that we have talked about at this forum this weekend, because where are a lot of the resources coming for the hardware that we use in the United States and many of our partner nations? A lot of those resources come from China. They come from Taiwan. So we really have a vested interest in developing our own resources and gaining access to them in allied nations, protecting the interests of Taiwan. That is important. But then also smart investment in these areas. And that's something that the United States Congress is seeking to do through the China bill. And we can talk more about that here in a bit. But those were some of the overarching themes of the report, which is over 700 pages. But a lot of thought went into this, and we just need to act on it now. So yeah, the federal government's doing something about it. We have an outline. We're involved in so many other areas, but just we have to focus. China can be outpacing us. I'd say we're in parity when it comes to quantum computing, the artificial intelligence, which they tend to use for more nefarious actions, tracking their individuals through their country and so forth. But it's a wild world out there, and we just need to know what those parameters are and then how we can best invest, but maintain our liberties and freedoms as we're engaging in those activities as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Since you brought it up, let's talk about this China bill. For those of you who were here, I guess it was Friday. I can't remember. The weekend kind of blurs together, to be honest. But Senator Coons and Senator Risch endorsed the U.S. ICA. That's the bill that was passed by the Senate.
Yeah.
Authorizes funding for the National Science Foundation. Appropriates funding for the CHIPS Act, $50 billion for semiconductor infrastructure. The House has not passed it. It's been about 5 months. It's been sitting in the House. You voted against it.
I did.
Explain why.
Right, and this is a point of contention for me. I do tend to focus a lot on government waste and accountability. So while I believe in the idea of the China bill and what we are attempting to do with the bill, because I do think it's important that we are investing in technologies, research, development. What I could not support was $250 billion without any transparency attached to it. And I had a number of amendments that I wanted to see on the bill that would allow U.S. taxpayers to know and understand where their dollars are going for what purpose. And the impetus of this was that, of course, we all know about coronavirus 19. Have you heard of the coronavirus? With COVID-19, we know or think that it came from a lab or thereabouts in China, the Wuhan Institute of Virology. But what we didn't know at that time was that American taxpayer dollars were actually being funneled to the Wuhan Institute of Virology to do research on coronaviruses through our National Institutes of Health. Our dollars were going to fund experiments at that lab where we think COVID-19 came from. So if we were investing $250 billion to do research and development, we, at least Congress, should know how those dollars are being spent. That was my opposition. I think it's important work that we need to do, but for heaven's sakes, we should have access to how those dollars are being spent and know that they are not being spent in communist China.
Okay,
That's very important.
Thank you very much. I told you it was going to get a little edgy. Don't worry. I got this. I'll bring us in. So, to be clear, the U.S. government has not determined the source of the COVID-19 outbreak.
Just an assumption.
The intelligence community has said there are two plausible scenarios: a connection to a lab or a natural origin. I happen to agree with you, senators, that the circumstantial evidence pointing to the labs is compelling. I happen to agree with that. That's my opinion. That's your opinion.
Compelling.
But we don't know.
It's an opinion.
But to be clear, we don't know. But the point is, either way, even if we don't know, we know that we have a vulnerability there. And we know that the safeguards of our scientific collaboration with China need to be increased for a very simple reason. When the pandemic hit, they locked us out of the labs. They won't allow the investigation to the labs. So how can we pour money into labs that tell us to go pound sand when the pandemic breaks out on their doorstep? So the point that if I'm reading you correctly, is that we have to close the safeguards, close the loopholes in our collaboration before we pour more money into the pot. Is that right?
Absolutely, that is correct. We have to have those safeguards in place to know that the money we're actually appropriating to do the research and development is not actually going to China to do research and development on how we're trying to protect ourselves against China. So I think there are simple safeguards that we could put into the bill to make it better and protect our interests as Americans and, of course, those of our allied partners as well.
Thank you. I think it's a good example because it shows where we have two interests that sort of compete with each other. We want to have open science and collaboration, but we also want to protect ourselves. Absolutely. It's complicated. Admiral. The private sector, so to be clear, you work for the military side of Boeing's.
That's correct.
And that's separate from the civilian side of Boeing.
It's all one Boeing company.
Yes.
And they're collaborative. I am on the defense side.
Excellent, just to be clear. How do you think about the challenge of doing business in a company that, on the one hand, is building the weapons to protect us against China, and on the other hand, is doing business with China in a way that, as we've just heard from James, includes civil-military fusion? If you're working with a Chinese company, you're working with the Chinese military. How do you think about that challenge, and how does industry think about that conundrum?
Thanks, Josh. Actually, the first thing I want to do is tell the forum how proud Boeing is to be a part of this. We're so proud to stand with Nancy, Peter, Club HFX in this forum, and so pleased to be here. And so thank you very much. I will tell you that our competitors, our industrial competitors, talk about a lot of things. We're actually doing it, and I'm proud to be here. Now, having said that, one of your panelists is an over-caffeinated fighter pilot, and he's talking to a Washington Post reporter. And if I'm in the front seat and you all are in the back seat and I say, watch this, the collective gasp will probably cause me to pause. You know, competition is an interesting thing. It depends what you do with it. And we've got some various things like AI and machine learning and those kinds of things. On November 9th, the PricewaterhouseCoopers study came out and said that the AI competitive market is $15.7 trillion between now and 2030. Trillion. So I would pose to the group, what do you do with that technology? What do you do with that technology? We've heard lots of examples of what some do with technology. I'll tell you that we evacuated 115,000 people from Afghanistan with a coalition of willing partners. And we're very proud of that because every single country that operated aircraft in and out of that airport had Boeing software in the airplanes. Mm-hmm. We had flight planning software that allowed us to get in and out of Kabul and save fuel. We had a reach-back crew that, through an emergency request from one of our countries, it wasn't even the United States, can I put 20,000 extra pounds in my airplane? All you aviators out there know that when you do weight and balance for an aircraft, it is critical. You can crash. If you've seen the images from how those young airmen took off from Afghanistan, I am so in awe of those young junior officers who chose a life over the restrictions and risked it. And I'm so proud to tell you that was Boeing software that helped them put 20,000 extra pounds of capability on those airplanes. Our flight planning software and sustainability is saving us millions of gallons of fuel. A recent experiment, and we go right into sustainability, a recent experiment with a Boeing commercial aircraft flying from one place in the world to another over a very long distance without the restrictions from air traffic control, okay, saved 78% of the fuel that a normal route would have required. 78%. So when we talk about technology, what Boeing focuses on is affordability, readiness, and sustainability. And I'd love to give you a bunch more proof points and just tell you what all we're doing. We had an eco demonstrator, our 8th eco demonstrator is a 737 at the Dubai Air Show. We have sensors coming out of that airplane working with NOAA to sense the carbon and other pollutants in the air stream from the airplane. Can you imagine those hundreds of thousands of flights every year measuring the airspace as well as the air inside the cabin and turning that data into something that we can do from a sustainability standpoint? So it depends what you do with the tech that I think is most vitally important.
Thank you. Let me ask you a follow-up question. We hear a lot about supply chains, rare earth materials, sensitive batteries, lithium technologies, polysilicon. We've realized during this pandemic that we're a lot more dependent on China in our supply chains than we thought. We never thought we couldn't get our masks. We never thought we couldn't get our medicines. Running a huge industry, defense industry corporation, how would you describe our dependence, our vulnerability to supply chains that run through China? And how do you think industry is responding to that in a general sense? How do you think industry is doing with that?
Yeah, it's difficult. I'll tell you that when you have a global supply chain and you have something like the collapse of demand from COVID, the very collapse of demand, supply chains stopped, no matter where they're coming from. We experienced significant delays in our products. One of our airplanes actually have a T7 tie on, T7As. Now, Senator Ernst Center looks like a bunch of pheasants, and so, but anyway, it's a bunch of T7s on here. But our T7 aircraft, we're on pace to build that. That airplane was created from a computer screen to first flight in 36 months. The power of digital engineering. We stitch it together in 30 minutes, fore and aft, when it takes us about a day and a half to do a Super Hornet. So we're on pace to deliver airplanes so much faster depending on a global supply chain that collapsed from COVID. We had a 10-month delay in our T7 build. We've recovered most of that delay, and that's because of the impacts on the supply chain. So I would tell you that global interconnectedness affects us all. And in a large industrial company like Boeing, where we're so dependent on our suppliers and sub-tier suppliers and sub-tier suppliers, that this kind of thing can affect our operations and the ability to bring technology for good.
Last question, and then I'll do one more quick round, and we'll go to you in the audience. Congress has not been great about appropriating defense funds. Congressional resolutions. This is to you, Admiral. My question is,
I know, oh my gosh.
Well, maybe it's to both of you, actually. We seem to have a broken appropriation system. Yeah. We don't have the bills on time. We don't even have a defense authorization bill yet. Maybe we'll have it, maybe we won't this year. Yeah. How does that affect your ability, your company's ability to fulfill its contracts, to do its job, to build the things that protect us?
Boy, in another forum, this would be awesome. No, I'm teasing. So before I went to Boeing, ladies and gentlemen, I was I advised the Chief of Naval Operations of the U.S. Navy about what we should buy. The system we have of acquisition, I would say, is a relatively difficult system, but it puts all the checks and balances in place, you know, to get the best technology for the American people. And so what I learned in that position was how to work with our congressional partners to justify what it is the United States Navy should have to equip the force, to man, train, equip, and maintain the force. And so what we try to do is actually work within the system to justify what it is we should buy. And so what Boeing is looking for when we partner with our customers who do what I used to do is we're looking for stable demand signal from our customers so that we can give predictable work. And so when we get that stable demand signal for this number of airplanes or number of ships or number of people, that allows us to plan. And so on the industry side, having a consistent demand signal from our customers to set that business environment also allows us to create better outcomes, because we can move from a hardware mindset to a software mindset, take our existing PBLs and other sustainment and training systems, put new technology on top of those systems. If we keep that demand signal going, Admiral Aquilino, the Coast Guard, the Army, the Air Force, all of our, and our international partners, we can give them better outcomes if we have that stable demand signal. So I would encourage the entire system to think about how do you get that stable business outcome and work within the system to do that.
Very interesting, thank you. And since I took a shot at Congress, Senator...
No, thank you, I appreciate it. I'm a recovering local auditor, so local county government auditor. And so this is really important to me, the authorization process as well as the appropriations process. And democracies are messy. We've talked about that all weekend. And unfortunately, funding those democracies can also be very messy. And the delegation that we have with us from the United States Senate, we're bipartisan. Most of us agree that we should be funding our military and funding appropriately so that we can grow and modernize, train, equip, and resource our members of the service to the best of our ability to outpace our near-peer adversaries. And a number of years ago, because we have struggled with this, we had a joint commission or a joint committee on reforming the budget and appropriations process. I was one of those members. It was bipartisan, bicameral, and we could not come up with an answer. We couldn't even agree on how to make the process better. So we still have the same process. The National Defense Authorization Act that's in front of us this year, I think most of us in the Senate would agree it should have come up months ago. It did pass out of the Armed Services Committee in the Senate over 3 months ago. We've been waiting on floor time. And unfortunately, we're towards the end of the year. We need to get it done. But we are hopeful this will not be the first year in 61 years that we don't have an NDAA. So we will continue to work very hard on that to make sure it gets done. We know our members of the service deserve the absolute best, and we'll push for it.
Can I add something to the Senator's comments? So in the DoD 5000.2, the tools all exist to acquire our kit using multiple ways to get those things. What often happens is we get ourselves in a pattern of the type of contract through the DoD 5000 that we use, and sometimes the non-traditional ways to try to accelerate, because there are ways to go fast in the DoD 5000. You'll find that sometimes we get real comfortable with the traditional ways to do, especially a large, expensive program. And when our customers come and say, we'd like to try this other transactional authority or mid-tier acquisition, sometimes there's a recoil because, well, we're not sure that's the right way to do it, and so we get that sort of a restriction. But I will tell you that I think inside of that very large document, there are ways to go faster.
Excellent. Before we go to questions, I want to go back to James. And I'd like to ask you to, personal James away, put back on the NATO hat.
Okay.
All right, so NATO James. Talk to us about what NATO is doing on China. We hear a lot of the chatter. I don't really know what the specifics are. How is NATO thinking about it? What is NATO doing to reposition itself, both in acquisitions and policy, to deal with it? And what are the limits? When we think about what NATO should be doing, are there things that it shouldn't be doing? And how do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a really active discussion, and we are in the process of now the ambassadors are starting to discuss and the ministers are starting to discuss preparing the new strategic concept for the summit that'll take place in Madrid at the end of June. So this is really an open issue, and so even NATO James doesn't have the full answer for where that's going to end up. But I would say a few things. One is just to put the positive side down. NATO is open to engagement with China. And for example, and I give now James' example, climate change is an issue which does affect China, and maybe we can't deal with all aspects of this issue with China, but certainly from the analysis of what the problem is, I think there would be a mutual benefit, and I think many allies, if not all allies, feel the same way. So openness to engagement is definitely part of that. Second is that we have to recognize that NATO is not going to go to Asia in a military sense. There is no consensus to do that. I don't think there's much desire amongst allies to do that. But we have to recognize that China is coming to us, including when it comes to activities in our neighborhood, for example, the Western Balkans, when it comes to exercising with the Russians in our neighborhood, in the north, in the Eastern Mediterranean, when it comes to increasing activity in the south as well. So we have to just deal with the fact that China is coming to us, and it's not going to change. So that's a second sort of security perspective that we have to have. Third element I mentioned already, which is to organize ourselves to defend the principles and standards. Another track which we are pursuing, and it's not necessarily China related, though it has a China resonance, is to engage much more deeply in partnership with our partners in the region, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, on the security issues of relevance to them, which are also of relevance to us. And then the final point, and that is looking forward a little bit, I think we have to recognize, and eventually we might have to take into account, the very rapid Chinese military development, which has accelerated very quickly in the last couple of years. So moving towards a nuclear triad, the test of the hypersonic glide vehicle, nuclear capable, its very rapid expansion of cyber capability, rapid expansion of its nuclear arsenal, the reach of its missiles. And, you know, China's going to have to recognize that, you know, if it does that, it forces a reaction from the international community. It's not us being aggressive against China, but if you see that kind of development and that kind of reach with clear intent in the region and clear intent to continue to develop, and President Xi has been very open about the level of supremacy that it wants. He basically wants China to be a peer competitor to the United States within a couple of decades. The whole international community is going to react to that, first and foremost in the region, but even NATO can't stand aside from a defensive point of view, and that's a fact of life.
So just a little bit more. So then what will NATO do in that situation?
Well, yeah. So I think we should leave that to the NATO governments, but I think...
Can I get personal James back?
Well, I listed a whole bunch of issues, but I personally, personal James, whatever it is now, I can feel schizophrenic. I don't see, as I say, NATO going to Asia Pacific with big military deployments to, you know, send NATO flotillas through the South China Sea for freedom of navigation. I just don't see that. But having a Pacific perspective is already something we didn't used to have, and now we do. More active engagement with partners in the region. NATO has also kind of encouraged, we have encouraged the Chinese to participate in arms control, which...
How's that going?
Well, the whole arms control regime is going in the wrong direction. I think everybody can recognize that. But as China pours capability onto the field, we all need to put pressure on China to participate as a responsible international actor. If it wants to be a peer competitor, it also has to play by the rules, which benefit China as much as they benefit us, to have stability and predictability. The challenge is not with, well, first of all, it's convincing them to do that. But when it comes to traditional platforms, you can count and you can verify. When it comes to artificial intelligence, when it comes to cyber, when it comes to data exploitation, there, you cannot use traditional arms control tools. They don't work because verification is impossible. You can't count code. Even if you could verify, they could change it the next day with an over-the-air update like a Tesla. So arms control doesn't work in the same way. So we have to set norms and standards in international bodies, but we have to convince China to sign up and abide. And right now, they are not. So it's a real challenge. Mm-hmm.
Excellent, thank you. Before we move to questions, I would like to inform you all and ask you all to participate in the Halifax Forum's #StandWithChina campaign by the registration desk, which you will pass on your way out. There is a kiosk, and you have an opportunity to record a short video. You can use one of the sentences they provide. It's to stand up for those, for the Chinese people and other people oppressed by the Chinese Communist Party. Stand with China, stand with the Chinese people. It's very important that we make a distinction between them and the party that oppresses them. For questions, please raise your hand. Please tell us who you are, where you're from, And please put any long opinion statements in the form of a question. And we'll start with Lobsang. And please wait for the mic.
Oh, thanks, Josh. James, you give very good analysis of how China is using technology and AI to export to autocratic countries. But as a Tibetan, we have been a victim of it for the last many decades. And we've been saying this for the last many decades. Now, suddenly, people are realizing it because it's coming to your door. And, Josh, when you mentioned rare earth and lithium from China, actually, some say that as high as 80% of rare earth comes from Inner Mongolia, which is an occupied nation. And as high as 60+% of lithium come from Tibet. So all the Chinese-made high-tech gadgets you have, when your battery dies, you should know the Tibetan battery is dying, lithium is dying. Now, again, as per your point that we all are asked to tweet about stand together on China, we will be doing that. We will be using social media. But we should realize that how China has used, international agencies like World Bank. China is still the largest recipient of low-interest loan, more than Africa as a continent, right? They use WTO, they use WHO, United Nations, to their advantage and against us. Now, same with the campaign, Stand Together on China. We will tweet, we will share on Facebook and Instagram, but all these three social media are banned in China. No one in China will know about it. Right? Having said that, but they are using social media against democratic countries in the world. For example, Chinese government television network, CGTN, if you go to their Facebook or social media, they have 90 million followers and subscribers. In English, CGTN, Chinese government television network in English. Now, if you look at CNN and BBC, combinedly, they are nowhere near 90 million. So in English media, Chinese government television has more subscribers. Now, in Chinese government television network in French has 17.7 million. In Spanish has 15.3 million. In Arabic, they have more than Al Jazeera, 14.4 million, right? So in your languages, so how they're using social media against you while they ban you from, Chinese people in China use Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. So I think this is something, we can do about it, right? I mean, why allow them to use against social media against us? Well, when they ban it, us and entering inside China. So again, in the year 2019 alone, CGTN subscriber increased by 20 million in 1 year. And 4 of the 5 fastest growing English media network are Chinese media. Global Times, CGTN, Xinhua. So these are the challenges that we're facing. So now, obviously, we will do that, stand together on China, we will tweet, but we should realize that not even a single Chinese in China will hear about it. Now, can senators and congressmen do something about it in the act of reciprocity? China can use Facebook, but the Facebook should be allowed in China. If you don't allow, then you can, ban them. It's just, reciprocity. We allow you, you allow us. If you don't allow us, we will not allow you. So such kind of action is needed. So the Chinese government has used, as James said, $870 billion trade deficit, your money against you. So this is something we need to think about. This is something I think we can do.
Thank you. Senator, would you like to?
Well, and yes, I think that's such a great point. And I think the theme of this panel, too, China's quantum leap backwards is, to your point, they are such a technologically advanced country. However, they oppress their people. And the further ahead the country gets, the more they oppress. And so there are certain soft levers that we can put into place, and trade is one of those levers that was addressed somewhat during the last administration. We hope to see it continually addressed in this administration. China does not live up to its trade agreements. It is not. So there are certain things that we can push back on. All of the goods, as we were talking backstage, all of the goods that are purchased, so many of those are coming from China. You know, they're disposable items. They are things we really don't need that could be purchased from friendly nations or right here in the United States, or sorry, Canada and the United States. But those are soft levers of power that we can use against the Chinese, and we certainly should. We should, but your point is so well taken. Thank you.
Thank you. Over here. We have the mic. First row. Second row, sorry.
Thank you, Josh. My name is JJ Omojua, Alpha Rich, Nigeria. So sometimes it feels like we're playing Mr. Nice Guy with someone who wants to kill you, right? Well, that's just a statement. Initially, it looks like technological advancements in the West used to be led by governments. Increasingly now, it does look like it is led by profit. In China, it is steady. Everything is in the interest of the CCCP. And James was talking about not being in the game at all. So I was wondering, apart from getting in the game, how do you get in the game and then make sure that China is the one chasing the game rather than we chasing China? Because increasingly, everywhere you go, I don't know how much of it is propaganda. I don't know how much of it is Chinese propaganda. I don't know how much of it is the reality. But everywhere you go, it looks like we're playing catch up with China. So where do we find the intersection between profit and the interest of advancing ahead of China and the role of our government in this? Thank you very much.
Thank you. My 2 cents is that we could do an entire panel on the conflict between profit and our national security when it comes to China. And for sure, that's something we're going to be talking about. My sense is we need to start at the capital markets. There's no reason why we should have open capital markets that are actively funding the companies that are building concentration camps, building the cameras that sit atop the concentration camp walls, building the islands in the South China Sea and the missiles that go on those islands. It doesn't make any sense. The capital markets is how the Chinese expansion is funded. And then, as we've heard, they borrow more money for us. But I'm not the expert. You have to read my book if you want to hear more about that. Does anybody else want to tackle that one? James?
Well, I'll give you one example of what we're doing in NATO. So it's official, James, for a second. Because we can't instantly transform this, but one of the things that we mentioned was much closer collaboration with industry than we have now. Right now, China and the private sector, China's private sector, is intimately linked. We have a situation in which the private sector controls a lot of the innovation, but is in many ways distant from government, sometimes leans away from government, the tech companies. So I think we could have a much more active campaign of engaging with companies to bring that confidence back. One of the things that we discussed last night at dinner, which NATO has just published actually, is, for example, we've just published principles of responsible use for artificial intelligence. So we took a decision and then we published it. And one of the reasons we published it was to make AI companies comfortable working with the defense sector. So they know what it's being used for. So their employees can say, okay, we have confidence working with NATO because we know that these democratic principles will be preserved. But we need to go beyond that. So we're setting up right now an engagement with the startup community, with test centers, with accelerator sites, with a little bit of funding to help them work with us, to educate them about what we're doing, what we need, get them comfortable with us, and if they want to work with us, some seed money to help them bring this product to market. That's been a bit of a gap in the way that NATO engages with this community. So, and we're doing that right across the alliance. We'll try to offer rapid contracting and access to all of our markets so there's an incentive for them. So this is the kind of thinking that we need. NATO's maybe a little bit behind the US and Canada and other places, but we're getting there. So practical programs with real money, with real engagement with industry is something that we have leaned back from. But I would just make one final point. We shouldn't think that innovation is only with companies anymore. Governments still need to continue to do that. Like everyone's got an iPhone in their pocket, and you think, iPhone, oh great, that's, Apple did that. Almost every technology, they made it look good, but almost all the technology in there has its origins from government. like the screen, the memory chip, the GPS, the location, all of this came from, there's like 12 major technologies in an iPhone, and all of them had their origin from US government investment. So we can still do this as governments as well.
And the vaccines too, but we're not going to go back there. Right?
Absolutely.
Thank you. We have time for 2 more, so let's keep them quick. Sir, second row. And then we'll go to Kelly in the back.
Thank you. Ayman Muhanna, it's my 9th Halifax. And over these 9 participations, we've seen real democratic regression in NATO countries, Turkey, Poland, Slovenia, Hungary, but also across other countries, Brazil, Philippines, Tunisia, Lebanon, Egypt, Sudan, you name it, with absolutely no intervention, little to nothing done to support them. So how should we believe that we can actually develop democratic criteria for surveillance, for data privacy, and promote them when on many other elements of democracy we've done absolutely nothing as international community of democracy to actually support? And we've seen this regression. Why should we believe that the NATO, non-NATO James amazing list of to-do list will actually be implemented? Thank you.
Well, let's give Senator a chance to.
Oh, certainly, and thank you. And sometimes I feel that way as well. Who said sometimes we play Mr. Nice Guy? You know, I think sometimes we do play Mr. Nice Guy. And it's not that we have to be the bad guy out there, but certainly we need to make smart investments in those budding democracies and others that want to join us. We cannot be passive about the freedoms and liberties that we have been given. I was sharing a story with a delegation, the Ukrainian delegation, the other day when I first visited Ukraine as a college student on an agricultural exchange. It was 1989. It was the Soviet Union. And I thought, as a young woman then, when I went on that exchange, that because we were in the Cold War, the United States was a world superpower. The Soviet Union was a world superpower. I thought both countries would offer their citizens the same liberties and opportunities and freedoms. And yet, when I got into the Soviet Union and I went with those other Iowa students out to that collective farm to work for that summer, the first question the Ukrainians asked us when we came together at the community center was, what is it like to be an American? What is it like to be free? And sometimes we forget that as democracies, that we have it so good in our countries, but we need to start stepping up more and more for others that want to obtain the freedom that we have. And we cannot be passive in the face of Russia. We cannot be passive in the face of China. We cannot continue to do that. We have to engage globally to maintain not just the status quo. We can't just sustain, but we've got to continue promoting democracies around the globe.
I can't think of a better place to close. Apologies to Kelly, but we are out of time. Thank you all. Let's give our panelists another round of applause. Stand together on China, not stand together with China. In the lobby, on your way out. Don't forget. Stand together on China. Thank you so
Please enjoy a short break and